health conscious, and D as well. But definitely, that cooking bit and thinking about the inputs for me is really important. There's also, the other reasons. And understanding that when you go into the kitchen is really important, because if you're like, say, a health-driven person and, broccoli and brown rice does it for you, and like you're dating somebody who's like, this person who likes to bake baked goods all the time, like you're by definition almost going to set up this kind of aggressor type thing between the two of you. So understanding that it's not her, she's not trying to get me fat or whatever it is, it's just people have different types. So besides psychology, there's also physiological differences in the way we taste and how we are. That's where this thing comes in. Some people will taste these things, or I should say some people will like these things more than others for actually an interesting physiological reason called super tasting. Who here has heard of this before? Oh, cool, you guys are well informed. Who hasn't heard of it? That's a better question. Okay, I like you people. Okay, so if you've done this before, skip actually doing it. And how far back did we get with these? Who does not have, or sitting next to somebody who has one of these? Ooh, sorry, back half of the room. Consolation prize for you later. So what we're going to do is go ahead and open this up. I'm going to toss this one back so somebody can catch it back there. Maybe? So yeah, pass that back. So there's 2 little strips of paper in there. Hand the person sitting next to you one of those. Don't put it in your mouth. Don't do anything with it yet. I swear it's not LSD. Yeah, it's great. Like I'm giving out little strips of paper that are like coated with chemicals, and I'm giving out white powder. Like, I'm surprised I haven't been arrested yet. Okay, so the deal with this is it's basically a genetic test. I should give you 2 warnings. One, some of you won't like this. So like if you don't want a bad experience potentially, there's a little candy in there. You'll know if you need that. The second warning is technically it's a carcinogen, so it's a really, really minor dosage. It's not going to do anything. So is the flight to get here, she says. You flew? Okay, so go ahead and stick that in your mouth. Little paper. Don't swallow it, just on the front of your tongue. Who said that? The candy's for you. She's like, this tastes like shit. Icky, horrible? Okay, so the people who are saying icky and horrible are like this, my person on the left here. Some of you kind of maybe tasted something. Like you can taste it, but like you don't get what. Is that people are complaining? What? Evil aftertaste. Aspirin. Sour, bitter. Bitter. Okay, and then some of you are like the person on the right, John, who just like, tastes like wet paper, right? Okay, so the deal with this is that some of us actually taste certain set of compounds. Really bitter. Others of us can kind of vaguely taste it, and some of us don't taste it at all. This is called super tasting. If you're looking at the percentages here, it is genetic. It's 2 genes. If you've got both dominant, then you are super taster. If you've got one or the other, would gum affect this? Splanthulin, it might, but I don't think so. Why, you didn't taste anything? Yeah, you're a non-taster. Sorry. Now, a lot of people are like, oh, well, I had food in my mouth. I should do it again. It's like, no. You'll know if you taste it. So then, yeah, it's a genetic thing. If you've got both dominant alleles, you're super taster. If you've got one or the other, then you're a medium. And if you don't have either, then you're a non-taster. It is differ based on gender. So females are actually a little more than 3 times likely to be a super taster. And it also differs based on ethnicity. So Asians are actually more likely than Caucasians to be super tasters. So on that piece of paper was this chemical called phenolphthalecaramide. Say that 6 times fast. It doesn't actually exist in nature, but it's similar enough to compounds that do exist. Oh, different slide, oops. Yeah, so tasting. It's just one of many thousands of compounds that we're able to taste. Like, it was discovered completely by accident in the 1930s by this DuPont chemist who spilled some on his counter and he didn't notice. And one of his lab mates was like, what's this bitter taste? Like all good researchers in the 1930s, he started testing on his family and friends, before OSHA. I think researchers today are jealous of this guy because he could just say, here, try this. So there are other compounds that are probably more significant than phenolphthalecaramide, but it's one that we happen to know about. There's something with cilantro. We know cilantro is genetic, but we don't actually know yet specifically what it is. But about 11% of people, it tastes like ivory soap. Say what? It's really disgusting, says the guy here. I happen to like it, so It's a genetic difference. And this goes to the point of like, if I was cooking for you, like I'd have to know that there's a difference in physiologically that you don't like it, and keep that in mind even though I love it. So that kind of goes to the point. When it comes to phenylphthaleate, it doesn't exist naturally, but it's similar enough to compounds that do exist that people who are super tasters are less likely to smoke. They're more likely to add sugar or milk to coffee or tea to kind of cancel out that bitter flavor. They're less likely to eat green vegetables, and there's some thought that they're actually more likely to have certain forms of cancer because the glucosinolates, which I can never say, actually supposedly help prevent certain forms of cancer. Sugar tastes up to twice as sweet. There's other differences for super tasters as well. Things like capsaicin, what makes hot peppers hot, carbonation, soda, things like that, tend to be more irritating, quite literally from a cellular level, to people who are super tasters. My poor friend Shimon, immortalized in this great photograph. If you don't have one of these test strips and you really want to try this, you can put blue food dye on your tongue because the papillae, the little taste buds in your tongue, don't actually stain blue, and you can count the number of dots like in a 3-hole punch area. It's kind of a rough way of doing it as a proxy. So if you're like watching this like on a video, you can try doing this. It kind of works, but it's kind of hard to do. But it's doable. Just put it out there kind of as a note. When it comes to bitter, when it comes to bitter and cooking, we use salt to kind of cancel out bitterness. So things like quinine, this is what's in soda or tonic, sorry. If you put salt into that, it'll actually become less bitter. So it actually literally cancels it out. So if you're somebody who can taste certain bitter compounds, you taste them more, you're going to use more salt. So if you're like, say, cooking some Brussels sprouts and you throw salt on top of it to kind of cancel out that bitterness, and you taste Brussels sprouts as more bitter than somebody else, to them, it's going to taste too salty. So keep that in mind too when you're cooking for somebody. It's not a bad thing to necessarily leave like the salt out on the table for people to kind of adjust the seasoning to their own personal preference, because there really are like literally genetic differences. 5 tips to make things taste great. Yeah, taste, adjust, repeat. So what I mean by that is taste something, don't just blindly follow the recipe. Taste it as you go and kind of think, hey, what could this use more of, or what's kind of missing. Balance the salt and acid. So we tend to think about seasoning as being just salt, but there's actually 5 or so primary tastes that you can kind of adjust. So a little bit of vinegar, a little bit of lemon juice in something can often kind of add the dimension that's missing in a dish. Primary taste, salt and sweet. I did this demo earlier this week with feta cheese and watermelon. It's like you can just make a salad of feta cheese and watermelon, a little bit of red onion. It's really, really good. And most people are like, I would never think these things would go well together, but they go amazingly well. A lot of that kind of comes down to, well, these primary tastes, certain things go well together as primary combinations. And in fact, kind of any double of primary taste ends up having something that matches, with the exception of, I think it's like bitter and, I'd have to look it up. There's like one I couldn't find an example for. But it's kind of a good thing to keep in mind. But if you've got something that's very kind of one-dimensional, think about it from a taste point of view, not necessarily from a smell or odor point of view, and think about what are the other primary tastes that might be good to add in there. Thermometer over a timer. Going back to kind of my sous vide bit a little while ago, when you're looking at, say, a piece of steak and you're cooking it, what matters is the chemical reactions in that steak, the proteins actually denaturing, and those things happen at certain temperatures. And yeah, to be clear, it's a time at temperature reaction, but it's not like your chicken. Let's say you've got a 6-pound chicken you put in the oven, and your timer says 45 minutes. It's not like 45 minutes matters. What matters is the internal temperature of that chicken for those chemical reactions. So when I say thermometer over a timer, timer's a good reminder of, hey, time to go check it. But really, using a thermometer is a great thing, especially in cooking meats. And finally, don't poke at things that are searing. If you've got some stuff in a pan, and you're trying to sear the outside of that steak, it's conforming to that pan really well when you drop it in initially because, well, the outside of it's raw and conforms well. And if you disturb it, it's not going to have as good surface contact, so it won't cook as well. So like you're, sauteing veggies or cooking meat or searing anything, just let it sit and rest in the pan. Like one of the most common mistakes I've seen with people cooking is like they just constantly feel like they have to do something and stir it. So don't. Okay, I'll take a break here for a minute, and I'm sure there are probably some questions because I know I've had a few people look at me. Go for it. 2 questions. So on the sous vide, let's say you set it to 143. Sous vide at 143, okay. Can you overcook the meat after 24 hours at 143? I'm going to say no with a little asterisk. No, you can't overcook it, and in fact, you can make really good brisket that way. So things like collagen actually take a long time to hydrolyze and denature and break down. This is why like duck confit, like you have to cook it for like at least 4 to 6 hours before anything happens. because it's not literally just a temperature reaction, it's a time at temperature reaction. Something will change. And the little asterisk there is that there are some types of meats, and especially fish, where there are certain enzymes that are present. Those enzymes will begin to react and break down the flesh. So if you do fish, you'd actually do fish at a lower temperature because fish myosin begins to denature around 100. He asks if there's a comprehensive chart of this in the book. He says, flipping through the book, here, just look at this. Next question. If you want a really good reference for sous vide stuff, Douglas Baldwin, just Google sous vide primer, SOUS space VIDE primer. I interviewed him in the book, so there's an interview with him in there. You can email me. My email address will be up in the last slide. I'm happy to answer questions via email. But he's got this great, kind of chart of thickness of meat, time, and temperature. And we'll get a little bit into the food safety stuff because there's a little bit of stuff you need to know that's, don't just go do it. But 143, given sufficient hold time, you're totally fine. Salt cancels out bitter, he asks. Is it masking or canceling it out? I'm not a physiologist. That's a really good question. I don't think it's actually, I could take an educated guess. I mean, you have different receptors on your tongue for salt, literally like ion gap receptors. It's not, no, I don't think they're actually bonding and like forming a different thing. I think it's still there, but that's just an educated guess. Other questions? I'm gonna go with the guy in the red, black, whatever color it is. Sous vide question was, is sous vide cooking useful for veggies? I personally don't find it so, normally. There are people that, if you look at Under Pressure by Thomas Keller, he's certainly got stuff in there for like asparagus and stuff. Veggies undergo this really interesting phenomenon around 55 degrees Celsius, 60 degrees Celsius, like 130, 140. They actually get firmer. It's like really counterintuitive, but if you take a carrot and you cook it at 60 C, the cell walls actually, there's cross-links that occur in calcium ions in the cell walls that actually fortifies it stronger. So if you actually look at carrots in commercial soups, canned soups. Think about canned soups that have all these veggies in them. And, you take it home, you heat it up, and the carrots are still firm. How do they do this? Because it's not like they're carrots. They're growing in the ground. If we do that ourselves at home normally, try putting some carrots into stew. Half hour later, they're mushy. And what they're doing is they're holding them at 60 C for half an hour, which firms up the cell walls. So there are some industrial applications where it's kind of useful and kind of cool, but I don't know if I feel like making canned soup and storing it. I usually eat it. So the only other thing I really do with sous vide and veggies is I'll sometimes take bok choy and cut it in half and drop it in the water along with maybe some steak tips I'm cooking. It's water. It's just you don't vacuum seal at that point. You're just basically kind of power cooking it, and then I'll drop it into a pan and steam it or sear it really quickly. And there it's just it comes to temperature faster. It's basically preheated. But from an actual cooking it point of view, I personally haven't really found anything that's oh my god, this is easy and amazing and tastes really good. If you're in the commercial restaurant world, yeah, absolutely, there are things they do, but they're kind of beyond what I found worth it. Green shirt. Okay, I'm sorry, can you speak up? You would normally cook them separately. You wouldn't want the veggies in that bag with the meat. It just doesn't really, I can't really think of any applications where you'd want to do that. Maybe you would for sage on the outside of something where you want the flavor present in the meat. But if you actually think about marinades and meat, marinade doesn't actually get very far into the meat. It only gets to in the first millimeter. So in terms of getting the flavor into the meat, unless you're brining it for a long period of time, the flavors aren't going to transfer from the veggies to the meat. And in terms of the veggies themselves picking up flavors from the meat, you're going to pan sear the meat probably afterwards, so toss your veggies in that pan if you want to do that. But in most cases, I haven't really, I haven't noticed it being different, I'll put it that way. So you're kind of asking what about the juices from the meat and what